Now, we haven't had a weapon video for a while, so today we will look at, appropriately following the death of technology video, a weapon type that has, until the most recent days of the 42nd millennium, barely seen use by the Imperium: Volkite weapons. Now, Volkite weapons are not commonly used in the modern Imperium. In fact, a great many people within the Imperium are not even aware of their existence, and this is primarily due to their extreme rarity, but some still do exist in Millennium 42. Some are even being produced by Forge Worlds once again. Volkite is a terminology used by the Mechanicus to refer to this weapon type, which is essentially a thermal ray weapon. They're described as imparting so much thermodynamic energy to the target that those under their shimmering rays will simply combust. The unfortunate victims of a Volkite weapon will be simply burned to cinders in an explosion of jetting flame, and this will often spread to nearby comrades, frequently taking them to the grave with them. In many ways, Volkite weapons are not entirely dissimilar to a melter gun, but they operate in subtly different ways. A melter gun will target a specific point on heavy armor and continue to heat that point, melting through it and inflicting heavy penetrating damage, or in the case of organic infantry, just often vaporizing it. A Volkite weapon I would best describe as something in between a melter and a flamer. Similarly to a melter, they are a focused heat beam weapon, but once they've hit their target, they will continue to burn and continue to ignite adjacent surfaces of material as they burn through. Organic matter will be explosively combusted, turning their targets into blackened corpses or just piles of ash. An energy blast from a Volkite weapon can even penetrate the ceramite of Space Marine armor. Within the specific technology of the Imperium and the Mechanicus, though, there is no detailed explanation of just how they function, only observations, and this is one likely reason why they are not now commonly available. However, there are often practical reasons as well, which we'll get into. But most probably the main reason is because they were originally manufactured before the Imperium existed, likely originating from the Dark Age of technology. So while they are able to be fabricated, the resources required are said to be considerable compared to more standard armaments. At the beginning of the Emperor's Great Crusade, Volkite weapons were fairly readily available, but the Great Crusade was a fast-moving and demanding campaign, and so many Volkite weapons quickly succumbed to wear and became unable to function efficiently or at all. Now, the Imperium faced different threats then compared to the modern period, and so Volkite weapons also saw more effective use back then. In the modern Imperium, while they do still have a place, they now face enemies such as the Necron, Chaos Marines, Tau, and so on, and so the flexibility of LoreGear has become far more important than it ever was. Throughout the initial crusade, the early versions of the Imperial Bolter moved to become the default weapon for the Space Marines, replacing Volkites. The Bolter also was shown to have greater reliability and versatility against the enemies of mankind, and so as the millennia passed, this would be another reason why it would become the standard issue for Astartes. Volkite weapons, though, were not issued only to Astartes. Within the early history of the Imperium, they were in fact so readily available that even the Imperial Army, which is the precursor to the Imperial Guard, had access to Volkite weapons, specifically the Solar Auxilia. In fairness, the Solar were some of mankind's more elite forces when it came to human soldiers, and also the Imperium's outlook was very different in its early days. It was a different time, more optimistic period for human history, and before the heresy, the Solar was seen by many as being second only to Astartes themselves. The Solar infantry were extremely reliable and would often be used in a pathfinder role for the Space Marine legions. As the Great Crusade wore on, the Solar would be stationed as the first line of defense against any who might seek to overturn the newly returned worlds of the Imperium. Because of their well-respected reputation, it was only right that they would be adequately equipped, and unlike modern Guard, the Solar also wore what is known as void armor, and this is an iconic and fully enclosed reinforced environmental combat suit. While the Solar did use a pattern of las weapon as the Guards do now, many of their forces often favoured the use of focused energy weapons like Prometheum flamers, melter weapons, las cannon, and also Volkite. The Volkite weapons were at one time a standard weapon choice for Solar Auxilia, but as with the Astartes, Volkite would become rarer and rarer over time. For both these forces of the Imperium, the Volkite transitioned to becoming a relic weapon and a mark of distinction, something that would be reserved only for veterans of a unit, a highly prized, powerful and symbolic piece of weaponry that was recognised as a tool of the early Imperium, and I'm sure for some represented many great victories, goals and achievements of this time. There have been at least as many as 10 variants of the Volkite system, even some which were automated, and that's not to mention infamous users of it as a primary weapon such as Fulgrim, traitor to the Imperium and Primarch of the Emperor's Children. Now I should note that Imperial Knights will also carry Volkite weapons. This is largely due to knights often being weapons of war that are many millennia in age and are diligently maintained by the sacristan and tech priests, so you may have seen Imperial Knights fitted out with Volkite weapons at any time. Dreadnoughts, because of their lives in stasis, only to be rolled out when their chapter need them, may also see some ancient patterns from the early days of the Imperium, like for example the Contemptor Dreadnoughts. And it is said that few of these dreadnoughts can still even be awoken and are living reminders of a time when the Emperor strode through the galaxy. Because of their great age and therefore the nature of their construction, which is now long since forgotten, Contemptor Dreadnoughts are also capable as knights of wielding Volkite weapons. For many millennia, the Volkite weapon would become a rare and largely forgotten tool. It's highly doubtful that many within the Imperium, as I said, would even have been aware of its existence at all. However, within the galaxy of the 41st and 42nd millennium, the tides have begun to turn, and not necessarily in the favour of humanity. The Volkite weapons, which were once seen as being beyond the reach and knowledge of the forces of the Imperium, have begun making something of a resurgence. They are once again seen to be wielded by the forces of the Imperium, but why and how? To discover this, we look at the scant reports that exist in relation to the Carnarvon tank. Like the Volkite itself, this tank pattern originates from the early prehistory of the Imperium, and few examples of the Carnarvon were believed to have survived. Similarly to Volkite though, the Carnarvon would have at one time been a common sight, and they share the status of now being a rare and revered weapon of the Imperium. Except for the fact that with the future seemingly and for some quite literally darkening for humanity in the 42nd millennium, the tech priests of Mars have apparently seen fit to reinstate the STC for the Carnarvon tank on several Forge worlds. This description raises many more questions than it answers, although it answers one thing that has been a fairly open secret, that the Mechanicus have likely been stockpiling technology for whatever reason, including STC patterns. The Carnarvon, beyond its already powerful multi-lasers, is like most relic vehicles due to their usually improved power systems capable of mounting any heavy weapon in the Astra Militarum. The ability to do this where other hardware within the Imperium cannot is attributed to them having a more power-rich but also more stable system infrastructure, coupled with apparently fiery machine spirits who are able to handle the demanding requirements of these still poorly understood Volkite weapons. But despite this resurgence and quite honestly surprising return to production of Volkite weaponry in the 42nd millennium, there is no seemingly mass deployment of Volkite weapons on the horizon. In fact, currently the only non-specialised infantry in a broad sense wielding Volkite weapons are the Tartarus Terminators, and this is likely due to the fact that their armour is a more ancient but also again advanced type, allowing them greater mobility than other examples of Terminator armour and no loss in durability or protection, but it is not specified. However, I would speculate that because of this more historical armour type, they are, similarly to Knights, Relic, Contemptor Dreadnoughts and Carnarvon, able to handle Volkite weapons because their power systems are also able to do this. Now, as I said, while Volkite weapons do not appear to be on the way as any kind of standard issue weapon, they do still represent a niche advantage over bolter weapons in some respect. The main benefit with a Volkite weapon is that every shot will weaken the armour of their enemy. A bolter round either has to penetrate the armour or cause enough of a blast on impact to deal shock damage, yet it could, for example, fail to make it through the armour or even just glance off. Now, Melter is a powerful weapon, but it's a concentrated short-range point weapon. And then you have a Flamer, which, while capable of incinerating mass groups of enemy, showering them with liquid burning fuel, is a surface contact weapon. So drawing the benefits of a Volkite weapon against its other alternatives is a very fine line, but it really comes down to versatility. It's slightly more powerful than a standard bolter, it can fire multiple rounds in succession, but it doesn't have the on-the-move speed of a bolter, it's a bit more bulky. It doesn't have the armor-penetrating focused beam of a melter, but if it were to hit its target, it's going to have an igniting effect burning through the armor, and this can leave enemy weakened and vulnerable to follow-up shots. Now, given the advancements in bolter weapons like the Stalker Bolter, or units like Primaris Hellblaster with plasma incinerators, which when supercharged will deliver the armor penetration of a melter weapon and the damage of a Volkite. Now, the trade-off of course with plasma weapons is that they're not always going to be the most stable of weapon. When fired with such power, they could even explode, killing the user. The Volkite though is a weapon designed from a different age and is therefore more refined and more stable. So knowing all of this, it's questionable how relevant the Volkite is for infantry. It's a powerful tool to be sure, but it sits fairly in the middle of infantry weapon options, and this is perhaps another reason why it is not seeing a huge resurgence. The nature of combat for Imperial forces is often highly specific. It requires the right tool for the right job, and not something which is certainly effective, but is also a bit of a jack of all trades. Volkite weapons though, when scaled up for more powerful units, like a contempted dreadnought, a knight, or a heavy tank of the Imperium, well then, it can still be a horrific force multiplier.